Ladies and gentlemen, before we get started on this episode, it's important to remember that we need to be empathetic and understanding of every single guest that I have on this show, so that way they understand that they can share this stuff without having any backlash coming from the community. I think it takes a lot of bravery for someone to come on this show and be able to tell about heart-wrenching things that occur. So please be understanding, empathetic, and supportive to my guests. If you enjoyed this content, it would really help me out if you did three things. You followed me on Twitter, you subscribed to me on YouTube, and you share out this video to any of your friends who might also enjoy this content. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Dives into the Minds of Esports. My name is Blake Panashevitz, and today I am followed by one of the best dressed men I think I have ever met. Also, an amazing host and shoutcaster. Please let me welcome Jamerson Lee. Welcome to my show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I always wondered how to pronounce your last name. I was just always too shy to ask, but it's great to know that's how it's pronounced. And one more point, best dressed, that's going to have to always go to Sumler. Come on, let's be real.
I said one of the best dressed.
Okay, you're right. Okay.
So, Semler is also a very attractive man who dresses very, very well. So I will have to, and he always has awesome bracelets on that, like, I'm kind of jealous of. So
yeah, he's 6-something, best dressed. Yeah. What can you do? You know, the man's living the life.
Yeah. So I'm super excited to have you on the show, especially considering that recently you were not picked up for the contender. So there's going to be lots of things that we can talk about. We're going to definitely talk about some of the esports stuff, but I think more importantly, especially with this show and what I try to cover, is you as a person. And there's definitely been some stuff out there about you that is very personal that you've put out, and I think that's really amazing, and I think it offers an opportunity for people to see that as inspiration or to maybe get a different outlook in life events that they're going through themselves. So I'm very excited. There's lots of stuff that we're going to cover. I'm going to start it off kind of easy because I think that that's a good thing to do. So your Twitter tag is Jet Set Jamerson. Okay. Did you get that gamer tag from Jet Set Radio?
Yes, just 100% yes. The first part is that, like, so my original, like, gamer tag was just Jamerson, but once I started going onto social media and, like, trying to sign up for, like, Twitch and Justin and everything like that, I couldn't get just Jamerson. So for a while it was actually, quotes, just Jamerson. After a while I didn't like the sound of it because, I don't know, I wanted a bit more of a ring to it. And I think I was watching, like, it was a Jet Set Radio speed run or something at the time, and I was like, yeah, actually I love that game. It sounds great with my name if I put Jet Set Jamerson together, and just all kind of stuck. I mean, the Dreamcast days were some of my favorite days in gaming, just because that's when, like, my neighbors and I would, like, really play together, and, like, that's how I made a lot of my close friends back when I was, like, in middle school. And Jet Set Radio was one of the games that, like, we all bonded over because, well, the game was fun, the music was a lot of fun, it was a different kind of game too that, like, you weren't used to. There were lots of shooters, there were lots of fighters, but then you're going around, like, vandalizing towns and like getting into dance battles, or skating battles and stuff. Like, it was really cool, and so yeah, it just rung true with me, and then it all just kind of stuck, and it works out well.
Okay, I'm happy I was able to. I don't know if you've ever told me with that before, but as soon as I saw your name, I was like, and your color scheme too, because I think your color scheme is actually very similar to the game as well. I was like, this has got to be from Jet Set Radio, which was an amazing game on Sega Dreamcast.
The thing about my logo currently, you can see it on the banner of my Twitter, and also, like, my icon for Twitch. It was a logo that was commissioned by I commissioned my good friend Nibs to make it. So for a lot of you guys familiar with Nibs, he used to play a lot of early Overwatch, and now he's moved on to streaming other games. But yeah, he's an amazing graphic designer, works at Asus, and he put that together for me over a weekend. So I'm glad that he was able to do that for me.
Yeah, it looks really good. So that's what I was wondering. So you mentioned video games being important to your life and kind of making your friends. One of the cool things that I kind of learned about you when I was doing my research on you is you moved around quite a bit, right? So how many times did you move around and from like explain your growing up and what it was like to move around in these different areas?
Yeah, definitely moved around a lot. There's a lot of like family troubles at home, and so like I was going back and forth between all these different places. I was born in LA, but we ended up moving to Seattle really early on. My dad, because he is of Korean citizenship, had to go serve in the military. He had me super young. He had me like when he was like 20. And you have to serve, I believe it's most people want you to serve by the time like you're 20, so that you can, you know, get on with your adult life afterwards. So he served when he was 20, and that was like right after having me. So we moved to Korea, back to family, and I lived there for about 2 years while he was serving out his military duty. As soon as he was done, though, we moved back to Washington, and then family troubles happened. My parents split up. My dad found another wife. We moved out to Los Angeles, and then in Los Angeles, we were always moving, just because like the climate at the time, economy at the time, like trying to have a multi-year lease didn't really work out. So we were always just moving around. So I was always changing schools. Through elementary school, middle school, and high school, I basically changed schools every 2 years. So that was difficult, especially for like a shy kid. Having to go into a new school every 2 years, make new friends. It was very difficult. I think I went through about about 8 schools throughout my elementary, middle, and high school careers.
That's a lot. So it sounds like you primarily lived with your dad then, when your parents split up?
Yeah. For the most part, it was with my dad. But, you know, he had a stable marriage through, I would say, yeah, elementary, middle school, and high school. And it was around high school where like he ended up getting another divorce. And so that happened.
Yeah. Actually, I come from so my parents split up when I was right around 6. Both of my parents got remarried, and both of them have since split up. My mom, when she got remarried, split up probably when I was 16, but my dad actually last year separated with my stepmom. So I am also I'm from triple divorce now, so it's very odd to say.
Yeah, no, both my parents also. My mother remarried, and then she also got a divorce. Like, I think it was another divorce like 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. So
when you first split up, how old were you?
I didn't really understand it at the time. So yeah, my biological parents, when they split up, I was about 4 years old. Oh, wow. And I was mainly living with my mom at the time, and they had come to an agreement. I don't think there was ever any actual like legal things done, but basically my older sister went with my mom, and then I went with my dad. But as a child, I had no clue what the hell was going on. Just one day, I remember getting dropped off at my dad's work, and I didn't see my mom for 7 years.
Oh my God, that sounds horrible. Like, it must have been it must have been very confusing at the very least if it wasn't sad.
It was definitely very confusing because, you know, I get dropped off with my dad, and then that night I go home and he's got his new girlfriend, and so all of a sudden she's like my new, you know, maternal figure, and I love her. I love my stepmom. You know, she's done much for me. Like, she raised me for 12, 13 years before my parents split again. And so, like, I'm always going to love her like she's my mom.
Yeah, that's how I feel about my stepmom, actually, is like my biological mom, I don't actually talk to that much anymore because the issues that we had with her because I actually lived with her and then I moved with my dad later on. But my stepmom was definitely probably my primary maternal figure growing up, and I will always be grateful for her for that because it's the only reason I have some semblance of like maybe a normal person kind of.
That's one of the things about being like, I forget if I'm first or second generation, but I think I'm second generation Korean, especially like amongst a lot of Asian families, is that, you know, it's very traditional. The males like the breadwinner, so he's always working. So my mom was my stepmom was a stay-at-home mom. And so I didn't really have like a paternal figure because my dad was working 12 to 16 hours a day, depending on like how many jobs he had at the time. And so it was mostly my stepmom raising me throughout most of my life. And so, yeah, she is like super close.
Was she Korean too or no?
Yeah, she was Korean also.
Okay. So that's something I have to ask you because you're second generation Korean. And I know you've mentioned this, moving away from this idea of being known as like an Asian caster before. But I imagine that there is probably at least a little bit of mixing of cultures there and maybe some moments where the cultures don't fit. And I can't really imagine what that would be like because I've obviously never experienced it. Did you have any issues where like you have a certain like cultural standard that you were taught, but maybe it doesn't fit with anyone else? Because you mentioned you moved a lot too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I never really, just like how I moved around a lot in different schools, I never really felt like I belonged at the different schools because, you know, having to make new friends and trying to figure out the entire hierarchy there. Because I didn't have that kind of stable environment. I didn't also have a very stable like Korean community environment. So it was definitely a learning curve for me when it came to like, you know, what is Korean culture like? Because before I had moved to LA, well, I was living in Seattle where there was almost no Korean culture. My parents were the only Korean people around. None of our neighbors were Korean. The closest Korean friends that we had were family friends that lived like 2 hours away. And so basically I was just learning a lot of this just from my parents. But even then, like, you can only learn so much by people telling you, you know, if you're actually socialized in it, then yeah, you're going to learn it. But I wasn't socialized in it. So this was all just kind of like, you know, the outsider looking in. So trying to learn some of the Korean things, like it's simple things like who to call hyung, who do you call nuna? Wait, do I call them oppa? No, I don't, because that's female. You know, like I had to learn these things by watching and instead of being socialized and like raised in it. So there was a lot of confusion growing up. For most of the values, you know, like I understood them and I respected them, but was I going to follow them? I didn't really want to because I'm American. Like I want to be more American, you know. It was very difficult trying to navigate that world where I just wanted to be an American, not a Korean American. So, yeah.
Did you ever have conflicts with like your parents? Because I've heard stories, and I don't know how much of this is true or stereotypes that especially like first, second generation Korean parents are very, very hard on their children on like work ethic. School is a big one that I hear about a lot of times. So what was it like for you in that regard?
Yeah, my experience doesn't change at all from most people's. I was schooled, of course, you know, went to school from 8 until 3, and then afterwards I would go to what we call hagwons, which is basically after-school academies for Koreans, where you get a lot of direct tutoring. So from basically second grade through middle school, I went to these places called hagwons, where essentially it was second school until 7 o'clock at night. Where you would get your homework done. And then, of course, you would proceed to learn other things. So by the time I was like in 5th grade, 6th grade, we were already working on algebra. That's like how kind of intensive like everything was. Like we were working on algebra, reading at a higher level, vocabulary, everything. And so it was pretty stressful because there were also a lot of things going on at home, but then trying to keep up the grades and also keeping up with like extra homework, because the hagwons also gave out extra homework. I was a very stressed child. I showed a lot of symptoms of just stress that really worried me, and then compounded upon that fact, very weird thing I could bring up was one of the symptoms that I had was something called geographical tongue. So it's where you get these really weird bumps at the back of your tongue. And so I remember thinking, oh my God, maybe I have like tongue cancer. And like that made no sense because I wasn't smoking back then. I didn't smoke until I was in high school. But like in middle school, I was like showing these weird stress symptoms. And like geographical tongue was one of them. And I remember going to the doctor and I was like, do I have cancer? Look at my tongue. What the hell is going on here? And he was like, no. That's just geographical tongue. You're just really stressed out for whatever reason. I don't know why. You're a kid. I'm like, yeah, sure. Kids don't get stressed. But yeah, I was extremely stressed. I was already going gray. Lots of gray hairs when I was about 12, 13 years old. And many other stress symptoms like that showed up. So it was very difficult.
So what do you do to handle the stress? Because a lot of people have issues with stress and handling, and you see people like even looking at like Overwatch over the last. I think like learning how to handle stress is definitely a skill that we need to grow. But if you look at like Overwatch, there was a lot of people who it was so stressful that they had to step down, and you were having these stressful moments when you were 12. How did you handle it?
So yeah, you can learn how to no, exactly. You can learn how to deal with it, right? And you can learn how to deal with the stress. But the thing is, as a kid, you don't know what your resources are. You don't know what your options are. And so it's either you know, keep yourself in that situation, or you just say fuck it to everything and just give it all up. And that's basically what happened to me in high school. I was just done with it because by the time I was in high school, we had moved again. I'm having to make new friends again. I miss all my old friends. I'm just tired of doing SAT prep like every day for 3-4 hours. I'm tired of writing an essay every day in preparation for the SAT. I was over it. And so, you know, trying to live up to my expectations, like my parents' expectations of getting an A and everything. Also helping out on my dad's work, by the way. So this is what was going on by the time I was just like, I just gave up and just was over everything. So you had mentioned earlier, you know, kind of work expectations and helping the family out. And so my dad actually had a pool hall in Koreatown, which I helped in. So basically what my life was like at that point was every day I woke up at about 5:30, maybe 5 o'clock to get up, eat breakfast, and go to school because I had to take the bus to school. I had to take 2 buses to get to school, actually. So we would do that 5 o'clock every day. And then, you know, school ends 3 o'clock. After school, I would have to go over to my SAT prep, which would take place from 3 to 7, like 4 to 7, 3 to 7. After that, I would go straight over to my dad's pool hall where I would work from 7:30 until about midnight, maybe 1, and then repeat. And so the worst part about that was that like a lot of times I didn't have time to do homework. Maybe I would try to do my homework while I was working at the pool hall because there was some downtime there. But you know, it's not a conducive environment where you have all these taxi drivers, like old Korean taxi drivers that are smoking, playing and drinking. I tried my best to do my homework there, but that's why I had to wake up at 5 o'clock to finish up any other homework that I had missed, was not able to complete throughout the day. So, you know, again, in high school, I was only getting about 3-4 hours of sleep, and not because, you know, I just wanted to stay up and like game all night, but because I had to keep up with my academics and actually finish my homework to get my grades, you know, up to a reasonable standard, which the only reasonable standard as a Korean is, of course, A's. But it was by the time, like, it was my end of my sophomore year where we had moved again and I moved to a different school. I had missed, it was like 2 weeks before, or like a week before, like the semester was out, by the way, and they transferred me in. But I had missed like the final test in one of my classes, and they're like, well, sorry, you're going to have to take this test on a book you never read. And yeah, I'm like, well, I'll try my best. And I bullshitted, and I was able to get a B. And I ended up getting a B in the class because of it. And my parents just went postal on me. Like, they're like, what the hell happened? Why did you get B in this English class? I'm like, well, here, let me explain it. But they would not live it down. And that's when, you know, I was just done with the stress. And I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Dad, I'm not working for you anymore. I'm not doing this SAT thing anymore. Next semester, all my grades tanked. I was basically like a C student because I was only showing up to class to take my tests. I wasn't doing any homework. I was just like completely rebelling at that point, you know, giving up. And I was happier. At that point. I started gaming again. And I wasn't stressing about school. I wasn't stressing about, you know, working anymore. And like, it was the happiest I had been in life in like 12 years. So, yeah.
So you mentioned that you didn't see your mom for 7 years after you left. What about your sister?
Same. They went off and moved to Hawaii. So I didn't see my sister. I didn't see my mom for 7 years until like I was around 11 again. They were still living actually. Okay. So they were still living up in Seattle, but you know, that's like an entire day's drive if you want to go from like Los Angeles up to Seattle. So we never saw each other. I saw them when I was like 11 or something, 11 or 10. I forget. I can't quite remember, but it was just before they flew themselves out to Hawaii and to live there for the rest of their lives. And so, honestly, again, for me, it was just like, what's going on? Oh, I'm going to see my mom. All right. That's cool. I'm going to see my sister. All right. That's cool. You know, like at that point, for the majority of my life, I didn't know them. Yeah. Right. We had gotten split up when I was like 4 or 5 and I was like 11 at this point. So that was like half my life at that point. So it was great seeing them. And then of course, like all the old feelings come back like, oh yeah, now I remember mom, you know, hanging out with her. Like she took me out to Disneyland. We had a day of it. And then all of a sudden the day was over and they were gone and they went to Hawaii. And I didn't see them again for another 5, 6 years.
Did you feel like you were a little bit abandoned? Because that's how I would feel. And I know that there were some things that happened like with my mom where she didn't really like talk to my brother very much when we ended up moving back to my dad. She would always try to talk to me, but she wouldn't really try to talk to my brother that often. And she would like send me gifts. I always felt like she abandoned my brother, and I always had a lot of resentment for that.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? As a kid, like you don't know what these feelings are. You don't know how to like actually put words to them. I'm fucking 11 years old. I don't know what I'm feeling. I just know that I'm angry at the world, right? And I don't know why. Like reconciling it now, like reconciling it when I was like an 18-year-old, like 19-year-old, yeah, I could finally put words to it. But back then, I didn't feel abandoned. I was just angry, right?
Yeah, because you don't know how to handle it. You're too young.
Exactly. You don't know how to handle it, and you don't know exactly what this emotion is. And sometimes you don't know exactly why you're feeling this emotion. So you don't know what the source of it is. You're just angry at the world. And that's what I was at that point. I was just angry. I didn't know why. And yeah. Looking back at it, of course, it was because, well, I loved my mom. I loved my mom just because of like the difference in relationship between like my dad and my mom's, right? My relationship with my dad and my mom's. And it was always just, you know, a lot of warmth from the maternal side and then just sternness and anger for my dad. And so, yeah, immediately, like, I wish that I was with my mom instead because, you know, my sister seemed a lot happier with my mom. Definitely a lot happier than I was with my dad. And so there were a lot of like conflicting factors there. And it was just something that as a 5-year-old, as an 11, 12, 13-year-old, I could not reconcile my brain. And I just had no clue why I was always angry.
Yeah. And I can't imagine. I mentioned that, like, how are you with your sister and mom now?
Again, it is still kind of like an estranged relationship, you know, because, well, we spent basically decades apart. Yeah. But my sister and I reconnected when I was like 18 years old, 19 years old. I went to go visit her when she was living in, while she was living out in Oahu. No, not Oahu. Yeah, I forget. I always forget the Hawaiian Islands. But yeah, I went to go visit her. Well, we reconnected when I was like actually 17, 18. Before that, while I was in high school, I went to go visit them over the summer. And then my sister and I have worked to just build up our relationship again because we didn't really keep in touch. Yeah. Like while we were basically kids and teenagers. And so, you know, now like it's really difficult because we try to stay in touch, but we're both adults. We're both living our lives and it's very difficult because we have an entire ocean between us, but it's much better now. Before, you know, again, like I said, I hadn't heard from them. I hadn't seen them in like 7 years, like when my parents first split up. And now like we have regular contact. We like call and text, you know, every month. And so it's a much better relationship. But, you know, again, like it's not growing up with her, right? Yeah. It's not the same kind of like brother, sister, like sibling relationship that a lot of people share. It's kind of like we're working towards it. And it shouldn't, you know, a sibling relationship shouldn't be something you work towards and like try to have. It should just kind of be. So again, Like most of my experiences growing up, it's about learning how to socialize in a certain environment when it should be something that's a lot more natural, should come a lot more natural to you.
Mm-hmm. It's actually like, I think you're a miraculous human being, and I'll tell you why. You always portray yourself as being so positive, and I think you are positive. Like the way that you just hold yourself and the way that you act, it almost seems like you try to take the best from a situation. But I don't think anyone would have realized that even people who seem positive or seem nice all the time have things that are traumatic happen to them, that are emotional, that are real. And I think you're an amazing person for that.
No, I appreciate that. And, you know, sometimes a lot of people think it's a facade of some sort, and to an extent it is, you know. Again, like when I'm out in social situations, I don't know how to be very social. And so I just kind of default back to just having a good time, you know, and just enjoying everything around me instead of like being caught up in my anxiety, and just being caught up like in my own kind of neuroses, you know. After, like, it takes me a while, like while I'm out when like socializing with people, to just finally kind of get out of that shell. And once I am, I'm just like really glad that I'm not in my shell anymore. And so I think that's why like I exude a lot more positivity when I am with people, because for the most part, it's I get two things. It's like, oh, you're really quiet, what's going on? I'm like, yeah, this is me amping up and working up towards being like kind of outgoing and like trying my best to like actually be here with you instead of being in my brain, you know. And then once I am out of there, I'm just so glad to be out of there, because you should understand, you know, like anxiety can really just really weigh heavy on you.
It's funny because like I definitely like work with people and stuff all the time, but when I'm out in social situations, I find it very awkward for me, and I do get a sense of anxiety. And I think part of it is because anytime I'm with people, I'm worried that they're just thinking that I'm like watching them instead of enjoying being with them, right? They're thinking that I'm always trying to like delve into them. And some of this is justified, where people are like, are you just trying to get in my head? And most of the time it's, I just want to know who you are. I want to know what type of person you are, because it's someone who I want to hang out with more. And I feel like sometimes that comes across very awkward. And I don't know if I know how to shut off like me as a person. I can't shut that off. That's just what I am. So I
understand that. I understand that a lot, actually, because this is a memory that goes back to like when I was, I think, 4 years old. I was with my dad and my stepmom, and we were out at a restaurant, and I'm just staring at these people because I was very curious about them too, right? Like one of my favorite hobbies is just people watching and kind of like giving them stories and stuff, right? And we were at a restaurant, and I was doing it at the time. And my dad, he just gets real stern. He's like, what are you doing? Stop staring at those people. And I'm just like, oh, sorry, Dad. And then again, I default to it into a different like group of people, and he scolds me. Well, my dad was actually very abusive. So at that point, he actually threw chopsticks at me, and I was like, okay, you got to get out of that. Stop doing that, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, all right. And that's like that was like one of the first times I had learned like maybe this isn't as socially acceptable to like just stare at people, but in the manner in which I was like reprimanded for doing it also wasn't like really like the healthiest of ways to learn, hey, you shouldn't do this, you know.
Embarrassing, and it makes you feel bad. So my stepdad was actually abusive. I remember a couple times where we got into physical altercations, and it was very hard, like growing up. You're angry at everything, like,
isn't it? I mean, yeah. Like it's very difficult. Like you and I do share a lot of like it seems like, you know, familial history where our parents split up. There's a history of abuse, and as a kid, and like you know, I don't like to default to this, but like a lot of gamers, like a lot of us come from like the same kind of history where we're all kind of just socially fucking awkward. And so when you're dealing with learning how to just be, you know, a regular person all the time, and how to make friends, and then you have all this other like stress at home and stuff that doesn't help you, it isn't conducive to like your development at all. Like it's a lot to fucking deal with as a kid. It's a lot to fucking deal with as a person.
It's it as an adult, if you had to deal with that, I can't imagine what that. And there are adults who they never got a chance to have an experience where they could learn to slowly work through it, and then all of a sudden they're put in a situation where they don't have a choice. They have to work through it, or they're gonna fail. And a lot of times people fail because it's so extreme.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like I'm still working through it myself. Yeah. Like
I don't think we can stop.
31 years old at this point. Yeah, there is no stopping. And the worst part is that like it's compounded by like the internet, which is now, you know, like constantly evolving. You have to find new ways to interact with people. And me as I'm like slow in my ways, and it takes me a while to adjust. And so I can't keep up with the pace of the internet and like and social media and everything. It's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot. So you said you're 31?
Yeah.
I would have never guessed that. Actually, I wrote down what I guessed your age was. And I think I put 25, 26. And I based that kind of off of some research I did. So did you go to school later then? Because you went to school from, what, 2011 to 2015?
Yeah, I did. So I graduated high school from 2006. Like high school was 2006, and then I took 2 years off because my parents had split up again my senior year. And my dad decided to move back to LA, and I wanted to stay in my area because finally, you know, again, it was like the last 2 years of high school for me were like very transformative. And so I made a lot of friends. I gave up the academic life, and I was just enjoying my life, and I didn't want to leave that behind again because finally I had found a place where I was happy and kind of just at place. And so my dad moved back to LA, and I decided to stay in Rancho Cucamonga, which is out in the Inland Empire here in Southern California. And so, you know, I had basically given up on going straight to school, going straight to like UCLA or something like that. And so, I mean, I remember I took the SATs and I didn't really care. I ended up getting like, I can't remember. I think it was like 2160 or something for the SAT at the time.
I took it, so I wouldn't even know what that is.
Oh, yeah. SAT is basically the West Coast's ACT. Yeah. And so I took it. I even took like 3 or 4 AP classes my senior year, but I didn't take the test because I was like, doesn't matter, because I'm not going straight to college. I'm going to end up going to JC. So yeah, my first year out of high school, I was basically a townie. I was going to a JC at the time, and I was just planning to transfer over somewhere. And this is the point where my dad and I became extremely estranged, and he was basically out of my life for like 3 or 4 years.
Was that a choice made by you?
Partially, yeah. It was just because, again, I hadn't reconciled a lot of like our history at the time. It wasn't until I was like 24, 25 where I was just like, you know, bad shit happened to me. Let's get through this. Let's work through this, work through the emotions, and then move on. But yeah, it was basically like kind of a choice like, hey, you know, I just need, I finally have like my independence, and I'm going to stretch this as far as I can. Because, you know, I spent the last fucking 18 years living under your terror. So I need this. And so I ended up, after the summer of my senior year, you know, moving out of my house. My dad moved back to LA. I was basically living in the garage of a friend. I was going to JC, and I was holding down 2 jobs at the time. So it was difficult to try and, you know, be a full-time student while working like 70, 80 hours a week. But I was still having a lot more fun than I would imagine if I was like living with my dad. Of course, you know, there was that FOMO, like all your friends come back for like winter break, for summer break, and they had a great time at college. They had a great time in their dorms. And while you were, you know, still like basically stuck at home, but you know, I still wouldn't trade it because I learned so much from that experience. But again, the timeline, I spent 2-3 years at JC before I transferred out to UCI. Got to UCI, found out very quickly that I didn't have the money for it. And so I had to look for alternative like work. And I ended up going to Korea for about 6 months, where I was living with family and I was working, and just spent the entire 6 months just saving up and then having enough money to come back to finish off like my last year of school, which is what I did. So yeah, 2 years or 3 years in JC, spent a half year in Korea. Wait, 3 years in JC, 1 year in college, like proper university, where yeah, proper university, came back or went to Korea, ran out of money again after I came back from Korea, because at that time, Korea or California tuition was going up like 33% every year. And so I had to take time off again to work again. And so, yeah, it was just a very long extended time. And the second time I took a break from school, it was really extended just because trying to live in California while saving up for California school was nearly impossible. I was working 2 jobs. I was actually working 3 jobs at the time. Yeah, I was working like 3 jobs at the time, because I was working as a chess instructor, and I was working at a coffee shop, and I was working, well, as a chess tutor also. I was taking on extra chess tutoring jobs at the time. And so I was working like 80 hours again just to try and survive. And I was like saving up $200, $300 a month. And $200, $300 a month is not going to you're not going to be able to like really build up anything to try to go back to school. And so it was a real struggle. It took me another 2 years to get back into school, but I'm glad I was able to and finally finish it off and be done with it. But at that point, I was like 26 or 27. So,
So chess is a passion of yours, then? Something you enjoy?
It was something that was introduced to me by a roommate of mine. She basically, like, she was working as a chess instructor. She's like, hey, this is a good way to make some extra money. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's learn it. And then like all things I do and like all games, I'm competitive in it. And so I wanted to be really good. And so, yeah, it's, not as much as a passion as it was a few years ago. Like, I've really given up on a lot of chess. I've forgotten a lot of chess. Most of my opening knowledge is gone now. But, my basics are still there. But forgetting your openings is actually like a huge thing. So I'm basically, once again, probably playing around like 1600, 1700.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned when you were rebelling in high school and you gave up everything, that's when you got back into video games. You're actually very good. Is that when you started to notice that you were like very, very good at video games? Because that would have probably been, you would have been older, so there would have been more competitive scenes coming out. And you would have had the time to dedicate towards it.
So around 16, I ended up getting a computer. And that's when I started playing like Counter-Strike and Diablo again. When I was younger, I was playing it just at home, but like I was playing against bots. Yeah. And in Diablo, it was just PvE, right? Running through the single player campaign. But yeah, I was playing Counter-Strike again a lot in my senior and in my junior and senior years. And it helped that like, I had found a group of friends that were also like gamers. So we're all playing like MapleStory together, Gunbound, Guild Wars actually took up a lot of our time. And the thing was, like, I didn't know I was good at games because I had, I guess, ladder anxiety. Mm-hmm. Like PvP was always something that like worries me. It still worries me to this day. When I picked up League of Legends when I was like 22 or whatever years old, I played against bots up until like level 30. And like, I remember the first just normal game that I loaded up for like PvP or whatever, in League of Legends, I was shaking. I was so scared. I was so nervous. And then it was just like, oh wait, no, after winning my first 3 or 4 games, like, no, this is nothing. This is just like playing like your normal games. It's fine. But regardless of that, any game I play in, that first game, I get a lot of anxiety. I get very nervous. Even with Overwatch, the first time I got into quick play, I was very nervous. Like being in quick play during the beta, I was super nervous. And this is something that hasn't left me. I know now that I'm pretty good, and most of the games I play within like the top like in like the 97th percentile normally. But I still get that anxiety and I still like worry about my performance all the time.
So it's kind of cool that because you are very good at video games. Like 97 percentile is very good compared to especially like everyone else. But it's funny is if you look at like video gamers in general, the people who get very, very good at games, normally there's what I like to call like a break point where something happens where they start to dedicate a significantly larger portion of time to video games. And that is, I think, one of the major factors why they tend to be better than other people. And if you start, like, if you ever watch my other shows with like players and stuff, you'll actually see it's a common question I ask because of that, because something that I've noticed is there's like a break point where people have this, and it seems to be something that could potentially be important.
Yeah. Then I think my break point would have to go back to like League of Legends, because that was the first time where I was like considering, hey, maybe I am like good at this video gaming thing. And at that point in my life, this was about 8 years ago. This was like when Justin TV was like really on the rise. Yeah. Before it made over like the transition to Twitch. And so I started like watching a lot more streams. You know, I was playing League, I was watching a lot more streams, I was watching a lot more tournaments. I was thinking, hey, this is possibly a thing that I can do. I was playing League at that point in my life. Again, it was a point in my life where I was working about anywhere between 50 to 70 hours a week, while also trying to go to school and also trying to play League. I was still playing League like at least 30 hours a week at that point, 6 hours a day easily. So I think that was my break point where I finally thought, hey, I'm good at video games. I'm good like in competitive video games, most importantly. And, you know, I can try and maybe make something of myself at this point. Within the span of basically a summer, after my friends and I reached level 30 and we started playing ranked, you know, they had middle out at around like gold, and I continued to climb. I was playing with my roommates at that time. I had like 3 other roommates that played League of Legends with me. And yeah, they had like middled out around gold, and I just kept going. And, you know, next thing I know, I'm plat 1. I'm like, hey, like, you know, I might be good at this game. And I figured that was my plateau. Plat 1 was my plateau. I never made it past plat 1.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I hit diamond.
No. Yeah. There was a summer where I was just cursed, right? I would go for my promotions, right? Like my plat to diamond promotions. And in those games, like I would win my first 2 and then lose my next 3. Like every time I hit promotion, it was win my first 2, lose my next 3, win my first 2. And there was just a summer of just me being plagued by not being able to get into diamond. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, League. Oh, I actually kind of miss it. I took a year off of it when I got into Overwatch, but I do kind of miss it a little bit now. Like there's like the old memories that are like, remember when this was so much fun? Did you enjoy this? And I'm like, no, I remember the end too. I remember the bad parts. So one of the things that you've talked about is contenders, and what would plague Blizzard is how they set up their secondary scene, right? And their talent growth scene. And you had mentioned, I think it was back in 2017, that this would be one of the biggest issues for Overwatch, is setting up this scene in an effective way. How do you think they've done so far? Do you think that the contenders is actually to grow talent? I'll ask an easier question.
Talent in which regard?
For the Overwatch scene, the Overwatch League scene.
Okay, so for like players. Yeah. It was the biggest issue is that there's like, you know, a consistency issue. And now that we have more teams coming in, that might not be as much of an issue going into 2019, you know, having a lot more academy teams. But again, we saw how big like the consistency issue was across all the contenders teams. You had your academy teams that had a ton of fucking funding, had a lot of support against players that like had none. I look at LNL, look at where they've come so far. You know, 2 seasons in now, or well, 3 seasons in now, and now they're an academy team and they're stomping on people, right? I believe they're like, I didn't watch this week's games or last week's games, but what, they're 8-0?
Doing really well.
And so they went from like winning one match in season 1. And then being the first non-academy team in NA to beat an academy team, and now like they're just winning outright. Look at the difference in like what support can do. So now that we are finally seeing more teams getting into it, we're seeing the structure that should have been there. But 2018 was more of a building period for the tier 2 scene. Again, though, like a lot of people would probably say, this could have been combated earlier on by just not killing the Overwatch scene for the better part of a year and a half by not giving out like tournament licenses. Yeah. Like we could have been in a much healthier state at this point, but taking, the reins of control, like it's finally going to start paying off in 2019 for NA. For NA. EU is still very difficult to try and manage because, well, now there are technically 2 EU teams, right? Yeah. Or 2 EU contender slots with Paris and Spitfire. So like they're still dealing with that. It's gonna have to take them at least another year for EU to get proper like kind of consistency across their across basically their competition. Korea's lucky because, well, it's Korea and Korea is always going to be nuts. China is actually taking a step back in like how they perform their scene, because before everything was done on LAN, it was very Apex style-esque, right? Where everything was done on LAN, you had to play there. And you had a competition every week, but now it's all online again. And so the level of competition in China has gone down. The level of competition in PAC has gone down. Overall, like it's a net loss, I would say, for the entire scene, even though North America has developed its way up, has worked basically towards a good state, but everywhere else has basically been boned. Like Korea and NA are the only places where like you're good. But like EU, you're still like starving for an org. You have all these players that don't have an org that are just playing out of sheer passion and trying to make it. China, they're lucky because, well, it's China and Chinese esports always has money somehow. But the Pacific region absolutely got completely like they have nothing now. Like it's Blank's no longer playing in the PAC region. Hey, at least South America has a region, so maybe there's that. Maybe at that point it's a breaking even point. I don't know. I was watching actually a South American streamer, and like his ping was actually at 23, so I can't imagine.
Oh, maybe not. I thought they had. For some reason I thought they played on the NA server, but maybe they have their own server. So.
I was watching a streamer. A Brazilian streamer, and his ping was at like 23. So I think
they must.
I don't know if it's in Brazil. I remember actually South American servers coming up, and like people were complaining that South America is actually a much bigger country, or I mean much bigger continent than people imagine, and that one server isn't enough. Like because because NA is big, like west to east, but South America is like large from north to south. And so it is actually, you need like 2 servers like we have, NA West and NA East, and you need like South America North and South America South. And so I don't know.
Yeah. So you mentioned players. What about for the casting talent? Because I can't imagine that they're working on developing casting talent, because they've made cuts in casting talent.
They made cuts in casting talent. I don't know. It's weird because like, so for the last 2 years working with them, like I was consistently asking for feedback, and like most of it would just be like, yeah, you were good. I'm like, okay. And then all of a sudden I'm cut, and I asked for feedback and I had to wait like another week. And I'm just like, well, I consistently always ask you for feedback. And this is actually like one of the biggest issues that a lot of other casters had. Basically working with Blizzard, it's like, I want to know what you think I'm doing well, and I want to know what you think I'm not doing well, so I can at least work towards it. Again, being left in kind of just like this weird like ennui where you're just like, you don't know, right? You're just kind of like in this constant kind of like fear for your job like area. It's very hard to navigate, and like I wish they were a bit more forthcoming with their feedback. Because again, like,
yeah,
I asked for on numerous occasions, just be like, hey, you know, oh, even if you have to email me, just I want to know what you think, and I want to know what other people and what people in Blizzard think, like what's making you happy, what's not, blah blah blah. And you just weren't getting that. Yeah.
That sounds very unfortunate. I'm sorry for that. Looking at getting into casting, you actually started working in esports. I don't know if it was for free or not, but you started working in, I think it was 2014? Because you were working with Team Coast, and you were also a wiki editor for Esportspedia.
Oh, wow. You really did get into the research. Yeah. Yeah. League of Legends.
Else, I want someone to remember that I try to know my shit. I try to
I don't think there's only like 2 people in the world that I've told that I've like actually told that I worked at like Team Coast or worked with Coast at the time. Mm-hmm. And like the other person that knows about it was just because like we were in it together at the time, my roommate. But yeah, 2014 was about the time that I got in. Like, it's in terms of like for like broadcast talent, that's pretty late to get into like any kind of like esports work. Like most of these, you know, you look at Golden Boy, you look at Monty Doa, Uber's been doing this for like 7 years or 8 years. Like Monty and Doa have been doing this for like 11 years, 12 years. Golden Boy's been also doing this for like 12 years, you know, like if you look at anyone else, yeah, their careers that started way back when. But again, I didn't get into like competitive gaming again until I was about 23, 22. And so like I had a super late start on it. And it's, you kind of feel that in the scene, like coming in as like basically I'm still like a newcomer to everyone, you know, and like it's like changing schools again. It really is. Because you know, you had all these existing relationships, you're coming into this new scene, you're trying to figure out how to be a social person, like how to actually interact with everyone. So again, it's kind of like is that outsider looking in syndrome once again. Like, yeah,
it was very odd breaking into the scene because I'm 26, I'm gonna be 27, so even I'm considered like older for like some of the esports people, especially like coaching staff. Like I think it's changing now with like Overwatch and stuff, but a lot of times a lot of the people who are playing or a lot of people who are working are much, much younger than I am. And so I could see you being like 31 now, but you were probably, 29 when you broke in? Right around there? That's still significantly like an age thing. And I can't imagine not having anxiety doing that. So how did you handle that? Like when you first got it? Because you were working with Esports Arena for a while, and I think you did casting with them. You casted some CSGO stuff before that, some League of Legends stuff with UCI, I think. And like you get this opportunity to work with Blizzard, and I can't imagine not having a ton of anxiety going into there. How did you handle that?
So it was actually a very stressful time in my life. Because again, you know, the casting and then working I was doing with Esports Arena, at first it was free, and then they brought me on. When I was working as a volunteer for them for like 4 or 5 months, and then when I was brought on, I was brought on at minimum wage, and so you know, still not that much money. I was still working early on in my career, about 2-3 jobs at the time. So 2 jobs, and then also trying to do like Esports Arena on the side. It was very difficult. It was very stressful. And then compound upon that, of course, just the anxiety of like being on camera, learning how to do that. I remember the first time like I actually got on camera to do anything in like any kind of camera work, and it was fine because they were like, oh, we're having a problem with the stream, so we're not streaming, we're just recording. I'm like, okay, actually that's a lot better, you know. We were doing this Counter-Strike tournament, and we had some pretty big names, like Cloud9 showed up, and then it was before like the Brazilians like became super famous, right? So like Taco Henne, Lucas, FNX, they were actually playing in the tournament. It was like super cool. And then midway through the recording, they're like, oh yeah, we're live on Twitch now. You had 3,000 viewers. And I was wearing my glasses at the time, and instantly my glasses just like fogged up and you could actually see it because we were on the desk when they said that. And so, yeah, like it does have like, there's a bodily reaction to dealing with stress and like the anxiety. And that's how my body deals with it. I get super heated. Like I blush up and I get super hot. And then of course that translates to like steam on my glasses, and it does show. But other like ways, I remember the stress manifesting itself. I had a bald spot. I had a fucking bald spot. And like the thing was, I didn't ask you. Yeah. No, it was a stress-induced bald spot. And like, I didn't even know it because like my hair was long at the point, right? Where like, it was almost like, it was a bit longer than this. And so like, it kind of just combed over itself and I didn't realize it, right? And then I went to go get a haircut and the person was just like, hey, you got this bald spot back here. I'm like, what do you mean? And it was like this big. Like this big on the back of my head. And they're like, yeah, I guess you're just balding or it's stress. I'm like, what do you mean? It's just stress. And he's like, yeah, that happens sometimes. If you're really stressed, you can have just a bald patch, but it looks like you still have some hair there. Maybe it'll grow back in. And the thing was, it wasn't just like a bald patch. It was like this patch that also had like really stringy white hairs in it. And so it was, again, reverting back to like my middle school like days where like I was getting like patches of gray because I was stressed out. And so not only was I getting patches of gray, I was losing hair at that time. It took probably a full year before like the hair grew back in. But I have these bald spots on the back of my head, and that did not help with the stress because that just stressed me out even more. You know, like you get these stress things and like they just compound upon each other. Exactly. It's a vicious fucking cycle.
Yeah. So how do you start to deal with that? How do you start to make your way through it? Are you able to deal with it, or do you still have issues dealing with it?
So I was fortunate enough to just find a point where things started dying down, where I was finally getting paid for my work. Blizzard called me out to do, like, the first time Blizzard asked me out to do something for them was TESPA. And that was great, and that was some extra money. But it wasn't until like Contender Season 0 had happened, and then World Cup had happened, where I finally found this like balance of basically my finances and work. And so I was able to quit working at the coffee shop. I didn't have to tutor chess anymore, and I could just concentrate on just casting. And it was at that point where like finally things started dying down. But I was still really extremely stressed out at the point over finances. But it became a lot more comfortable. Yeah. And things got better, and then it just kind of just exponentially got better. Where finally now I am at a point, 4 years later after I started all this, where financially I'm stable. I'm not worried. I'm not stressed out. I can just concentrate on doing Overwatch, concentrate on just, navigating esports. So I'm very fortunate in that regard for a lot of other people because, for any game, you only have about 12 possible slots really for broadcast talent. And, Overwatch is really lucky in the fact that, contender system did come out. There are more slots for talent. But again, it's very few people make it. Very few people get to a point where they get to be this comfortable. So I find myself very fortunate that I was able to get here, and I am not as stressed as I was before. I'm stressed for different reasons now. Yeah. But I'm happier to be stressed about these reasons than about my financial stability.
Can you go into these reasons?
Well, again, like financial stability, like if stressing about whether or not you can pay your rent, whether or not you can pay your, like fucking buy groceries, it's a different kind of stress than just being like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get this job. Oh, you know, like I'm working this job and like the client is being extremely unreasonable, but I still have to do this because they're the client, and at the end of the day, they're paying the paycheck. You know, that's a different kind of stress. The first one leads to bald spots. The first one, you know, leads to my health just being to absolute shit because, well, I'm also at that point, I'm also sacrificing my health, my physical health, and my mental health at the same time. And the other one is just my mental health. You know, at least like, hey, I've got a client. I'm able to live. I don't have to worry. I don't have like compounding stress, you know, at home. I'm able to, I have the extra free time to do other things like that help me deal with and manage my stress, right? Like I'm able to work out. I'm able to do some cardio, and in turn, all of those help you manage the stress. And so the other way, like it's just always compounding. And it's, again, that cyclical kind of vicious cycle that we were talking about. Well, this one is just, you only have the one source and that's all you have to deal with. And you have time and you have money to deal with it. So it's fine.
Mm-hmm. So another thing that I remember reading about with you, you mentioned stress, and we didn't really talk about this a whole lot, but when you were growing up, you said that you were bullied a lot. What was that like? Because I know I was bullied too, which is, again, I swear to God, when I was researching it too, I was like, holy shit, we have that in common. Holy shit, we have that in common, which isn't good. Like, these aren't good things.
No, yeah, it's not. It's not. Like, but it's kind of like, it's like, you know, you're in the trenches together, right? Like, yeah. That's like kind of like what it is. You're just in the trenches together. So you just kind of feel like this affinity towards.
So what was it like for you? Like, what was it mostly emotional? Was it physical too? What was it like for you?
It was definitely both emotional and physical. It just depended on like the environment that I was in, but mostly physical, where, you know, I was worried about getting ganged up by like lots of kids. But the emotional aspect came from just the fact that I was getting bullied and I didn't know why. Again, as a kid, you don't know how to really identify what your emotion is and why you're feeling it. You know, like I identified I was angry. I didn't know why, you know, and again, being bullied, like, okay, I was able to identify I'm angry that I'm getting bullied. I'm sad that I'm getting bullied. But you're left with that kind of also same notion of like, why the fuck am I getting bullied? Why me all of a sudden? And then when you come to realize the reason why is just because you're fucking different. Just because I was Asian in like a middle school that was 99% Hispanic, or Asian in a school that was 99% white, like that pisses you off even more. And so like, as a person that was already having difficulties dealing with their identity and like trying to figure out like how to be Korean and everything, like to have someone, you know, bully you because of it, like it didn't help my development in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Were you ever put in a situation where it was like, because you mentioned that there were times where it was almost so bad where you had to join functionally a gang of people or an actual gang. Was there ever a moment where you thought about doing that, where you were like, you know what, this would be much better than what's going on right now?
Yeah. So I went to Los Angeles High School, which is a very divided school, or was a very divided school. I can't speak to it now because it's been almost 12 years. Well, almost 14 years since I last attended. But you know, you had African Americans, you had Latinos, and you had Koreans, and you know, it was a very race divided school. And so yeah, I did consider like basically having to join like a gang for safety reasons. Luckily, you know, as a Korean, like it was kind of like your choice, like, hey, you know, whether or not you're in with us, whatever, but if someone does fuck with you because you're Korean and because there are only so many of us Koreans here, we're still gonna like, you know, back you up just by default. Mm-hmm. But like the idea was there, and I remember seriously considering when I was like 14, 15 of like rolling with these guys, because fuck, I could be walking down the street and all of a sudden get pulled into a van and like, you know, held at knife point, held at gunpoint. Like it was a very dangerous time in LA at that point.
Have you ever? How many times or how often did that happen where you were held at knife point or at gunpoint?
Oh, it didn't happen to me. It didn't happen to me, but like that was always a constant fear.
Yeah. Because it happened to other
like,
people.
Yeah, it never happened to me. Again, like I've been very fortunate throughout my life, and that was one of the arenas in which I was also very fortunate that didn't ever really happen to me. But you know, there were times where I was confronted on the street just for being Korean. Like I'm fucking walking from Yoshinoya to my cousin's house, which is like a 2-block walk, and 3-4 guys just confront me. They're like, "What are you doing here, homie?" I'm like, "Shit, I'm just getting food and trying to get to my cousin's house." You know, and like they're wondering if I'm part of a gang. And so like that was probably one of the major other reasons why I didn't join one, just because like, yes, I wanted to be affiliated for, you know, for kind of like the protection, but also being affiliated also makes you a target.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. But yeah, like being in LA, being in Korea at the time, Koreatown at the time was a very dangerous time. And like as a kid, like yeah, it was pretty scary. It was pretty scary.
I went to
again like,
like 21 kids, so I can't relate to that gang violence because they were like wannabe gangsters. They weren't actually gangsters. So I still got beat up because they wanted to be that, but they weren't ever like, I'm gonna pull a knife out and stab you. So like I can't imagine what that would have been like.
Yeah. It was weird because there was also like a lot of ties between the different Asian gangs also. And so like I remember there was this one giant like just brawl that we had at the park across the street from our school, where it was like, I believe it was just the African Americans versus like the Latinos and Asians, and like there was a weird truce between the Asians and Latinos, and then of course the Asians had like their truce and like ties amongst each other, where like the Chinese gangs would like back up the Korean gangs. And so like there's this one brawl where it was straight up 200-300 people just fist fighting it out. At one point, a line of like vans and sedans showed up, and like a ton of Asian people with bats and shit just came out, and they like got into the fight too. And it had to be like, it was broken up, like 9 or 10 cop cars showed up, yeah, to break this fight up. And it was nuts. It was nuts. And like, I couldn't be anywhere near it because I would have like been somehow accidentally drawn into this fight too. It was like, yeah,
that's
weird.
Crazy. So you have a lot of fortunate things, even with the negative things that happen. I think one of the most fortunate things that you've talked about has actually been your girlfriend. You've mentioned before that she helped dress you for like on stage camera stuff, and she's responsible for that. When did you first meet her?
Back when we were working at the Coffee Bean. So this was, she's gonna hate that I had to take a pause here, but 6 years ago.
Okay, so
7 years ago?
I don't know if she's gonna watch this or not.
I'm not gonna let her know. I'm not gonna tell her about this.
Okay. So my next question is: marriage in the distant future?
That's not actually something I'm considering right now, because my concentration is, of course, just esports, and you know, like with marriage comes things like home ownership and like children. And personally, like I don't have a career where I can afford either. You know, like I have a career where I'm comfortable, like I can live comfortably in the state that I'm in, but not if I'm looking for any other kind of like, you know, like long-term kind of investment stuff. And so I just can't do that.
Yeah. Me and my girlfriend, we actually had our, oh God, she's going to kill me if she watches this. I can't remember if it's the 4th or 5th year anniversary. Oh God. I'm gonna have to look later now. But we were talking about it last time, and I told her a very similar thing. Is like, I wouldn't be opposed to marrying you. It's just right now, I think that I need to be in a financially stable place. Even though she's an engineer, and like right now, she is currently supporting me while I do this content, while I do private stuff with other teams. And I love her to death for that. But we've definitely talked about it, so that's why I was wondering. Is because this is someone who like out of everyone that you've talked about so far, seems to be one of the most stable anchors in your life who is always there for you. I've heard you mention her in multiple different interviews where like, this is the person who's always supporting me. And she sounds like a really wonderful person to have in your life. And especially like if you look at esports, a lot of people talk about, hey, you can't be in a relationship or you can't have a relationship for this to be possible. I don't actually think that's true at all. And I like to showcase good examples of someone who is in a relationship that seems to be very supporting and helpful and is a good example for everyone else that you can be in this relationship with this job that requires a tremendous amount of hours and work, and it can work out.
Yeah, I mean, one of those examples I really look towards would be like Golden Boy and his wife Cynthia. They've been together for over a decade now, married for almost a decade now. And I had the pleasure of meeting her 2 years ago during World Cup when we were in Australia together. And yeah, you know, like they got married when like esports wasn't a viable real thing, but she's been there and supporting him all like this entire time, like, you know, been in his corner. And so like, that's one of the examples that I look towards. But again, like for a lot of men, it's who's the woman behind him that like makes all this possible. Right. Again, like I was working, like I said, when I was first doing a lot of my casting stuff, I was working anywhere between 50 to 70 hours a week, you know, and that also means my girlfriend was working somewhere between like anywhere between 40 to 60 hours a week. Like I wouldn't have been able to survive without her, you know. Again, it's that, we're in the trenches together thing. You know, she was there during the bad times and she didn't complain whatsoever, you know. Like we almost never actually throughout our relationship, like in the last 5 years, we've only had about three fights total. Beyond that, like she's just always been supportive. Like even though we've had hard times, like everything just, yeah, she's just always been a staple. In probably one of the more tumultuous times of my life, she was something that wasn't something I had to worry about, you know. Like I hate talking about her as like a concept and as a thing, but like in that regard, there was no emotional stress coming from our relationship. And to not have that emotional stress coming from the relationship, in fact, it relieving stress was just like a huge world of difference, you know. Like when I'm worrying about my finances, when I'm worrying about my career, but I don't have to worry about my personal relationship with my girlfriend, like it was such a huge like sigh of relief. It was a great kind of like getaway and escape from all the stress, just to be with her for an hour or two or something.
And her always supporting you through those things, right? Like
exactly.
Probably reassuring you that everything's going to be all right. Because that's what my girlfriend does. She's like, it's okay. It's going to be okay. We're going to figure it out. We're going to work through this. And that is one of the best feelings that you could probably ever have.
Yeah, exactly. And so like now I get to return the favor, you know, like I'm not making obscene amounts of money in any way, but I'm living much more comfortably, like orders of magnitude more comfortably than I was 2-3 years ago. And so now that does, like, I mean, I get to finally pay her back for like all the support she's like giving me. Is like, hey, now I want you to go after the career that you want to go after. So let me do this for you now. And, you know, you don't worry about money this time, and let's do this. And so, yeah. Okay.
Well, I like to end on a happy note, especially after everything in there. And I think that is probably one of the happiest notes that we can end on. Do you have any shout outs that you want to give?
You know, to everybody that's grinding back in esports, you know, I came from a, you know, like kind of very grassrootsy kind of tier 3-ish scene to get to where I am today, and I have not forgotten anyone. It's been amazing to see the growth of a lot of the people that I've like come up with, and so just shout outs to people like Bill Jump Carter, you know, who's been helping me out here navigate esports after contenders. Shout outs to like Dogman, you know, like he's now an ATL, and that's fucking awesome. Like I knew him from like back in collegiate, and he was trying to make it through like the tier 2 scene of Overwatch and stuff. Shout out to content creators like you, like Kick Tripod, all the broadcast.gg people that are putting in the work. Like, I feel like a lot of people that are making this kind of stuff, that are doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, also just not in the spotlight, don't get enough kind of recognition. So just shout out to everybody that's on the grind right now.
Okay. And then one last question. If you could see anyone on this show, casters, talent, behind the scenes people, who would you pick?
You know, I'd go with Dogman.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it from Jamerson himself. This has been Deep Dives in the Minds of Esports, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you.